A soldier reunites with his dog after years. You won't believe the reaction. A solitary streak of moonlight cut through the heavy darkness like a spotlight on a stage, illuminating the crouched figure of a soldier pressed against the crumbling stone wall. Each breath he took trembled with tension, echoing the faint hum of helicopter blades somewhere far off in the distance. He clutched a faded photograph in his gloved hand, an image slightly torn at the edges, bearing the face of a bright-eyed dog with perky ears and a broad, goofy grin. In that fragment of light, under those foreign skies, the photograph almost seemed alive, as if the dog itself might leap out of it. He swore he could even feel that familiar wet nose and hear the joyful barks that once kept him company on quieter nights. A sudden burst of mortar fire lit up the horizon. The roar jolted him back to reality. Fear tugged at him, but it was overshadowed by duty and by the memory of what he'd left behind. He exhaled and slid the photograph into a pocket close to his heart before scrambling into the shadows. In that war-torn landscape, hope was a scarce resource, but the face of that dog had become his personal talisman. With every breath, every step, he carried the desire to make it back alive, back to a world where that tail-wagging friend still existed, or so he desperately hoped. By the time the war ended for him, he was discharged with scars that ran deeper than the jagged shrapnel wound on his left leg. The homecoming was bittersweet. On one hand, he was grateful to step onto familiar soil. On the other, a suffocating anxiety gnawed at him. Could his dog still be waiting? He hadn't heard a definitive answer in years. Communication had been sporadic. The last he knew, the dog was placed in the care of a family friend. Then that friend moved. Addresses got lost, phone numbers changed, and somewhere along the way the updates stopped. He'd never mustered the courage to imagine a final goodbye, so he tried to believe that maybe, somehow, they would be reunited. But doubt was an insidious thing, blooming like dark vines in the corners of his mind. The day he stepped off the plane, a stiff wind carried the faint scent of jet fuel and old coffee from the terminal. People cheered for returning soldiers. Families held signs with bright colors and teary-eyed slogans. He walked through the crowd with a limp, still unaccustomed to the metal brace that supported his damaged leg. Strangers rushed to shake his hand, to thank him, to welcome him home. Each of their kindnesses was met with his polite gratitude, but his eyes constantly searched for the one face that wouldn't be there, the scruffy muzzle he'd left behind. He tried not to let the disappointment show, but it wrapped itself around him like a lead weight. Time blurred after he arrived home. There were medical appointments, endless forms, therapy sessions that felt more draining than comforting. But night after night, he dreamed of that dog. He saw those wide, trusting eyes in every dream, smelled the musty scent of fur that lingered after a rough-and-tumble day in the yard. Then he'd wake up to an empty room, heart pounding, sweat beading on his forehead, longing for just a clue, just one sign that his four-legged companion might still be alive. Weeks turned into months, with no real answers. Even as he tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy, he couldn't shake the feeling that a huge part of him was missing. His body might have been stateside, but his heart was still searching, wandering foreign deserts and jungles, looking for that wagging tail. Every phone call he made seemed to end with frustration or pity. People had heard rumors or half-stories. Someone mentioned the dog might have been taken to a shelter. Another thought maybe a neighbor had adopted him. The facts were always out of reach. The soldier began to collect clues like a detective. He drove across state lines to track down old acquaintances, rummaging through dusty boxes and attics for documents that might hold an address or a lead. Along the way, he heard stories of dogs that had come from military families, dogs that had run away, dogs that had found new homes. Each near miss left him feeling simultaneously relieved and heartbroken. Relieved that those animals were safe, heartbroken that none of them was his. One rainy evening, while flipping through an old notebook, he stumbled on a forgotten name, someone who was once close to the family friend who'd been entrusted with his dog. It was a faint thread in a tapestry of lost connections, but it was all he had. The next morning, he drove 5 hours across the state to a tiny suburban neighborhood. Houses were arranged in neat rows, each yard trimmed and tidy. He found the address scrawled on a piece of paper, but when he rang the doorbell, no one answered. A neighbor poked her head out, cautious at first. When he explained who he was looking for, her eyes flickered with recognition. She directed him to a new address, half an hour away. There, at the doorstep of a modest ranch-style house, he met an elderly man with kind eyes who remembered the dog and who remembered the soldier. The man invited him in, offered coffee, and rummaged through a stack of old letters. Finally, he handed the soldier a weathered business card from an out-of-state veterinary clinic. Scribbled beneath the clinic's phone number was the name of the soldier's dog. "I think they called me to confirm some paperwork," the man said quietly, recalling how the dog had needed medical attention at some point. The soldier felt his heart leap. Even though the card was dated several years back, it was more than anything he'd found in a long time. Without hesitation, he called the clinic. After a long wait on hold and several back-and-forths with the receptionist, he discovered a morsel of hope. The dog had been transferred to a rescue organization once his original caretaker could no longer keep him. They didn't have current records, but they offered another phone number, belonging to an employee who might have further information. Each conversation led to another breadcrumb, and the soldier followed each one like a pilgrim searching for salvation. As the search continued, winter transitioned to spring. The world outside began to bloom and stir with life, but the soldier was consumed by a restless energy. He was never quite at ease. Memories of nights under gunfire still haunted him. The thunderclap of a storm could set his nerves alight, catapulting him into flashbacks. Yet, he pressed on with the kind of stubborn determination that had kept him alive in combat. He owed that much to the dog who had given him hope, who had kept him laughing in the darkest moments of deployment. Gradually, the tangled threads of his investigation began to unravel. He found out that his dog, still miraculously alive, had spent time in multiple foster homes, each of them describing the dog as loyal, though somewhat haunted, as if he too carried an invisible burden. There were conflicting stories of escapes and relocations, but eventually the soldier confirmed one crucial detail. His dog was back in the same state, just a few hours away. The rescue shelter that had him now was run by volunteers. They welcomed the soldier's call, excited at the prospect of a reunion, but they explained that it might be complicated. Over time, the dog had developed wariness of strangers and sometimes even aggression. He'd bounced around so many times that he no longer trusted easily. The soldier's chest tightened at those words. He feared the worst, that the dog might not remember him or want anything to do with him, or that all the hardships might have changed his beloved companion beyond recognition. Still, he refused to give up. He scheduled a date to meet the dog, to at least see for himself if the bond they once shared could be rekindled. The day of the visit arrived. He barely slept the night before. Dawn broke with pale sunlight streaming through the blinds, painting stripes across his bedroom floor. He paced the house in a nervous frenzy, checking the time every few minutes until he finally decided to leave early. The drive felt both agonizingly slow and terrifyingly fast. His heart pounded like a drumbeat, accompanied by a swirl of emotions he could hardly name: anxiety, excitement, hope, and a pervasive dread of disappointment. When he pulled into the gravel parking lot of the rescue shelter, every muscle in his body tensed. The building was nondescript, just a low-slung structure with a chain-link fence forming a makeshift yard. Barking resonated from behind the walls. He stepped out of his truck, the brace on his leg protesting at his sudden movements, and limped toward the entrance. A volunteer greeted him with a cautious smile. She looked down, noticed his limp, and nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood that he had walked a long path, physically and emotionally, To get there, they guided him down a narrow corridor lined with kennels. Eyes peered out at him, some curious, some frightened, some pleading for affection. The smell of disinfectant and dog fur hung in the air. Finally, they stopped at the last kennel on the right. The volunteer motioned for him to wait behind a gate while she unlocked another. She stepped inside to secure the dog, ensuring it wouldn't panic or bolt. From his vantage point, he couldn't see the dog clearly. He glimpsed a flash of fur, heard a low growl, and felt his stomach flip. Then the volunteer led the dog out with gentle coaxing. His breath caught in his throat. There, graying around the muzzle, was the very dog he had pictured every night for years. The soldier had braced himself for changes. He knew the dog would be older, maybe frail. But seeing the truth was still a shock. The once bouncy pup was now cautious, stepping gingerly, tail low. Yet in those brown eyes, there was something undeniably familiar. The volunteer sensed the tension and reminded the soldier to stay calm, to let the dog approach on his own terms. The soldier sank to one knee, ignoring the jolt of pain in his leg. His hands trembled. Slowly, the dog turned to look at him, sniffing the air with ears pinned back. The soldier spoke in a soft voice, using an old nickname he had for the dog. For a moment nothing happened and the soldier's heart sank. But then the dog's ears twitched. He took a hesitant step forward, sniffed the soldier's outstretched hand, and let out a tentative whine. Time seemed to slow to a standstill. The soldier remained as motionless as possible, tears threatening to blur his vision. After a few more sniffs, the dog stepped closer. His posture shifted, tail inching upward, and with it came a spark of recognition, like a locked door creaking open. When the dog finally pressed his muzzle against the soldier's chest, letting out a low whimper, the soldier clutched him gently, tears falling freely onto the dog's fur. The volunteer watched with watery eyes and excused herself to give them a moment. The dog trembled, as if fighting through layers of fear and memory. But the soldier's voice was gentle, his scent perhaps a distant echo of better times. Slowly, the dog relaxed into him. That first embrace was equal parts heartbreak and triumph, each tear the soldier shed washing away years of uncertainty. They spent the next hour in a small fenced yard behind the shelter. The soldier threw a ball a few times, though the dog's old injuries made him less eager to sprint. Instead, the two of them just walked in circles, side by side. Their steps were uneven, the soldier with his brace, the dog with a slight limp in his hind leg, but there was a kind of poetry in their shared imperfections. It was as though they had both been marked by the same war, the same separation. The air crackled with a quiet electricity, an unspoken promise that they would heal together. The shelter staff watched the interaction with cautious optimism. They explained the adoption procedure, detailing that it might take time to finalize, and recommended gradual introductions to new environments. The soldier listened attentively, but there was no question in his mind. He would do whatever it took to bring his dog home. He'd endured separation, bullets, and bombs. He could endure a bit more red tape. Days of paperwork and waiting followed. During this time, the soldier visited as often as he could. Each visit, he brought a piece of clothing that smelled like him, leaving it in the dog's kennel so the dog could be comforted by his scent. He discovered that gentle pats behind the ears worked best, and that the dog now startled at loud noises. When a car backfired in the parking lot, the dog cowered in terror, eyes wide with panic. The soldier's heart wrenched, recognizing that familiar alarm. He soothed the dog with soft words and, in turn, found himself learning to calm his own racing pulse. At last, the day came when the soldier was allowed to take his companion home. The staff assembled by the front office, tears in their eyes, as the soldier signed the final documents. They shook hands and wished him well, reminding him to keep in touch. With the dog's leash in hand, the soldier led him out to the truck. Carefully lifting him into the passenger seat, he settled into the driver's side, heart pounding with excitement. He had prepared his home meticulously, purchased a comfortable dog bed, stocked up on treats, and even had toys that resembled the ones from their old life together. The drive home was quiet. The dog lay with his head resting on the console, occasionally looking up at the soldier as if to reassure himself this was real. In those glances, the soldier saw flashes of the pup he'd raised from a mischievous ball of fur. Bit by bit, the memories flooded back. The time the dog chewed through his favorite boots, the time they played tug-of-war with an old rope, the nights curled up in the barracks where the dog provided an invaluable sense of comfort. Each recollection squeezed his chest with bittersweet longing. Now, after all that distance and heartbreak, they were finally together again. When they arrived at the soldier's small house, the dog hesitated at the door. The soldier knelt beside him, offering reassuring pats, coaxing him into the living room. He had arranged furniture to give the dog plenty of space to move around without feeling trapped. The dog's nose twitched as he explored, taking in the new environment. It wasn't long before he found the plush bed waiting for him in a quiet corner. He sniffed it tentatively, then laid down with a sigh, as if realizing, for the first time in years, that he was safe. The soldier watched him, feeling an overwhelming surge of gratitude. Yes, both of them were carrying scars that would never fully fade. Yes, they had been separated by time, by war, by circumstances beyond their control. But they had found each other again, a small miracle in a world that so often chews people up and spits them out. He sank into the couch, letting the tension drain from his body. Across the room, the dog drifted into a soft sleep, and the soldier felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't experienced since before his deployment. Life settled into a new rhythm. Every morning, the soldier rose early to feed and walk the dog, moving slowly on account of his leg, but relishing the cool morning air that seemed cleaner with each inhale. At night, they sat together in the glow of the television or on the porch beneath the stars. The dog would sometimes rest his head on the soldier's lap, seeking reassurance. Gradually, the dog's timid demeanor began to melt away, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The soldier took him on short drives, to parks during off-peak hours, allowing him to smell fresh grass and meet the occasional friendly passerby. Despite the progress, challenges remained. The dog would still cower at unexpected noises, and the soldier, too, grappled with the echoes of combat. On nights when nightmares came, the thunder of gunfire, the suffocating dust, he would wake up gasping. Often the dog was there, placing a comforting paw on the soldier's chest as though to say, "You're here, you're safe." In those moments, tears often found their way to the soldier's eyes. They were both healing, leaning on each other, bound by an unbreakable bond that had been tested by distance and time. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, that spark of recognition in the dog's eyes grew brighter. He grew more relaxed, more playful. The soldier found joy in tossing a frisbee gently, watching as the dog chased it with an enthusiasm that belied his age. Each wag of the tail felt like a small victory, each contented sigh a testament to the resilience of love. News of their reunion spread among local veterans and animal lovers alike, and strangers started reaching out, wanting to share their own stories or simply express how moved they were by the soldier's determination to find his old friend. But just as life seemed to be settling into a new normal, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. It bore a government seal and looked official enough to quicken the soldier's pulse. Inside was a notice. Due to a clerical error, certain benefits he relied on to cover his medical expenses and rehabilitation were under review, and he might be required to repay a portion of those funds if his claim was. The letter warned of pending deadlines and the possibility of legal repercussions if he didn't respond promptly. Fear clenched his heart. The soldier had spent his savings on finding his dog, on ensuring the dog's medical needs were met, and on making his home a suitable environment for them both to heal. If he was saddled with this unexpected debt, it could upend everything. He might have to move, possibly to a smaller place that couldn't accommodate the dog. The sense of dread that followed him in war returned with a vengeance. Suddenly, the fragile peace they'd built felt threatened. He spent days making phone calls, gathering paperwork, and meeting with advocates who helped veterans navigate bureaucratic red tape. The stress made his nightmares worse. The dog sensed his tension and hovered at his side, offering silent support with each worried phone call or stack of documents the soldier pored over. Friends suggested he start a fundraiser or go public with his story to garner sympathy. The soldier was hesitant. He didn't want to parade his personal struggle in front of the world. Yet, he was desperate, not just for himself but for the dog who had already been through enough upheaval. In the end, he reached out to a local veterans group for advice. They were appalled by the situation and urged him to share his story, believing it could galvanize community support. Torn between pride and necessity, the soldier finally agreed. A local journalist caught wind of it and proposed writing an article highlighting both the soldier's heroic service and the dog's incredible journey. The soldier consented, though he felt an uneasy mix of relief and apprehension. The article was published online, complete with a photo of the soldier and his dog standing proudly in front of their modest home. The story captured hearts across social media. Readers were moved by the soldier's unwavering loyalty to find his lost companion and furious about the bureaucracy now threatening to tear them apart. The piece went viral in a matter of days, drawing attention from national news outlets and sparking a wave of support. People began donating to help the soldier keep his dog and pay off any debts that might arise from the government's error. Amid this flurry of media coverage and public sympathy, something unexpected happened. The soldier received a phone call from a high-ranking official who apologized for the oversight. The case had been re-reviewed, and the threat of debt repayment was being dropped. Additional support would be extended to the soldier to ensure his medical and living expenses were taken care of. Overwhelmed by gratitude, the soldier thanked everyone who had advocated on his behalf. The dog wagged his tail as if sensing that a weight had lifted. In the weeks that followed, letters and messages poured in from strangers who shared how the story touched them. Parents told their children about the soldier's perseverance. Veterans found hope that their own struggles might have solutions. Some offered donations despite the resolution of the financial crisis, insisting that the soldier and his dog deserved any help they could provide. The soldier, humbled, used these funds to donate to rescue organizations and to cover therapy programs for injured veterans. This gesture, in turn, generated even more goodwill. Yet beneath the wave of uplifting support and the joy of seeing the dog's life finally stable, the soldier felt a nagging sense that their reunion story wasn't quite complete. There was a question lingering in the back of his mind. Why had no one from the dog's long journey ever contacted him sooner? The fosters, the shelters, the rescue groups, someone must have tried to find the dog's original owner. He couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the dog's odyssey than what he'd been told. He began discreetly reaching out to past fosters. Some responded enthusiastically, glad to hear that the dog was finally home. They shared anecdotes of how he had run away or cowered at loud noises, how they'd tried everything to soothe him but never got far. Others admitted they were simply fostering too many dogs to do extensive detective work on each. While it was frustrating, he couldn't hold a grudge. At least the dog had been looked after, more or less. Then one late afternoon, the soldier's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "I think I owe you some answers. Meet me at the old orchard, 4 p.m. tomorrow." Underneath was a screenshot of the dog from years ago, wearing a frayed. Confusion tangled in the soldier's mind. He showed the text to a friend who insisted on accompanying him to this meeting. The soldier agreed, cautious but intrigued. They arrived at the orchard, a place that had once been vibrant with apple trees, now somewhat neglected. The sun dipped behind gray clouds, casting elongated shadows across the rows. After a few minutes of waiting, A woman in her late 20s stepped out from behind one of the trees. She looked nervous, clutching a small folder to her chest. She introduced herself as one of the dog's former fosters. With a trembling voice, she explained that she had once tried to track the soldier down. She'd received incomplete adoption papers that mentioned the dog's background as a military companion, but she'd been unsuccessful in finding current contact information. Then, after a series of personal tragedies, she'd had to give the dog up, leading to his transfer to another shelter. She felt haunted by the dog's eyes, the longing she saw in him. She always suspected he was searching for someone. When she saw the article about the soldier and his dog, guilt overwhelmed her. She texted, hoping to apologize in person and hand over everything she'd kept: records, photographs, microchip documentation that might reveal more gaps in the dog's past. The soldier listened, a flurry of emotion spinning inside him. He could tell she was sincere. She handed him the folder, tears brimming in her eyes. It contained additional pictures of the dog in different foster homes, sometimes looking depressed, sometimes on the verge of running away. In one photo, the dog was pressed against a chain-link fence, almost as if waiting for someone to appear. Another photo showed him lying next to a tattered blanket, eyes distant. The soldier felt tears threaten to surface, but he kept his composure, placing a comforting hand on shoulder. He thanked her for caring for his dog, for at least trying to track him down when it would have been easier to just give up. Looked relieved, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. They parted ways with an unspoken understanding. Sometimes life's twists are cruel, but a single thread of genuine compassion can lead to redemption in unexpected ways. Returning home that evening, the soldier spread out all the photos and documents on his kitchen table. The dog lay on the floor beside him, watching curiously as though sensing the significance. In each image, the soldier recognized a version of his canine friend, sometimes skittish, sometimes exhausted but always enduring. A lump formed in the soldier's throat. They'd both come so far, overcoming circumstances that might have crushed a weaker bond. In the following days, the soldier tried to share these new details online, updating supporters on the dog's full journey. Messages of support and love poured in anew. People were astounded by the dog's resilience, but even more stunned by the soldier's unwavering commitment. The story caught fire all over again, leading to another wave of interest. Offers for interviews with national TV networks came in, some of them promising to run heartwarming segments about the soldier and the dog who found their way back to each other. However, the soldier noticed something shifting within him. While he was grateful for the outpouring of kindness, each retelling of their separation and reunion raked up memories of combat, of loss, and of near hopelessness. He found himself spiraling into anxiety whenever a camera was pointed in his face. Nightmares that had subsided now returned with renewed vigor. Loud claps from film crews made the dog flinch. The constant scrutiny felt intrusive. Their story was no longer just theirs. It belonged to the public, to the hungry media that wanted a piece of it. One day, as a camera crew prepared for yet another interview, the dog started shaking so violently at the commotion that the soldier had to hold him to keep him calm. That was the tipping point. He politely told the crew they needed to leave. He canceled all future interview requests. In an emotional social media post, he thanked everyone for their interest and support but asked for privacy. Their story might be inspirational, but it was also deeply personal, and continuing to relive it publicly came at too high a cost for both man and dog. The public response was surprisingly respectful. Most people understood the soldier and his dog into a quieter life, turning their attention to healing without the glare of spotlights. Donations still arrived occasionally, and the soldier used them to help local shelters and to maintain a small therapy dog program for other veterans who needed canine companions to cope with post-traumatic stress. He and his dog became known in the local community, not as celebrities, but as empathic neighbors who understood hardship and wanted to help. Despite the calmer existence, an undercurrent of tension remained. The soldier's nightmares became less frequent but more intense when they did occur. He sometimes woke up disoriented, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. Therapy helped, but the real solace always came from the dog's presence. The soldier noticed how, in those moments, his own shaky breathing would synchronize with the dog's steady heartbeat. It was a kind of anchor, a reminder that he'd made it home, that he wasn't alone. One sultry summer afternoon, lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder grumbled like a distant battlefield. The soldier and his dog were out in the yard. The first massive raindrops fell, and within minutes the sky unleashed a torrential downpour. The dog tensed, ears flat, body quivering at the thunder. The soldier hurried inside, guiding him gently. Just as they reached the door, a crack of lightning lit the sky, and an explosive thunderclap rattled the windows. The dog's reaction was instantaneous. He bolted, pulling free of the soldier's grip on the leash. In a flash, the dog sprinted around the side of the house and disappeared into the sheets of rain. Panic seized the soldier's chest. He called the dog's name, ignoring his own limp as he chased after him. Rain pelted his face, blurring his vision. Each flash of lightning made him fear that the dog would run further, spooked by the noise. He circled the block, calling the dog's name until his voice cracked. The wind tore his words away, scattering them into the storm. With each passing minute, dread coiled around his heart. He spent hours searching, combing through the neighborhood, drenched to the bone. Neighbors noticed his desperation and joined in, driving slowly through the streets, scanning yards and alleyways with their headlights. But the storm was relentless, making visibility nearly impossible. The soldier refused to give up, his mind flashing back to battlefields where losing someone felt like the end of the world. Now he was gripped by that same terror, only this time it was for his dog, a companion he'd fought so hard to find again. Eventually, exhaustion forced him to stop. He returned home, soaked and shivering, guilt gnawing at him. He could barely sleep that night, haunted by images of the dog alone in the storm, trembling, searching for a familiar hand. At dawn, the rain had eased to a light drizzle. The soldier set out again with renewed determination, plastering the neighborhood with flyers, calling the shelter, and alerting local vets in case anyone brought in a dog matching the description. The hours dragged on. Each moment felt like stepping on shards of broken glass. He carried the dog's favorite treat in his pocket, whistling softly when he passed vacant lots or clumps of bushes where a frightened dog might hide. By late afternoon, the clouds began to clear. The soldier slumped on a bench in a park near his home, head in his hands. The memory of reuniting with his dog after so many years flitted through his mind. Had it been fate's cruel trick to bring them together only to separate them again? A sudden bark jarred him from his despair. He looked up, heart hammering. Standing at the edge of the park was a neighbor, half jogging toward him. She gestured for him to follow, excitement dancing in her eyes. The soldier leaped to his feet, ignoring the pain in his leg, as she led him to a cluster of trees near the park's border. There, nestled under a low-hanging branch, was his dog, soaked, shivering but alive. The soldier let out a choked sob of relief and approached slowly, not wanting to scare him off. Recognizing his voice, the dog inched forward on trembling legs and pressed his wet muzzle into the soldier's hands. Tears mixed with the remaining drizzle as the soldier held his dog close. The neighbor helped them get home, where the soldier wrapped the dog in warm towels, checking for injuries. Though scraped and exhausted, the dog seemed mostly unharmed. He whined softly as if apologizing for running away. The soldier stroked his ears, whispering words of comfort, tears still glistening on his cheeks. That night the two of them collapsed into a deep sleep. The dog nestled against the soldier, paws twitching every so often, as though in a dream. The soldier slept without nightmares, a heavy, dreamless slumber that gave his mind and body a chance to heal from the fear of losing the dog again. In the aftermath of that storm, the soldier realized something profound. He had spent so long searching for the dog, for closure, for a sense of peace that had eluded him since he'd left the battlefield. In finding the dog again, he discovered a purpose that anchored him, but the journey wasn't over. They were both works in progress, each shaped by trauma and bound by love. Facing these storms, both literal and metaphorical, was now a shared endeavor. Every thunderclap that rumbled in the distance was a call for them to stand together, to find solace in each other's presence. Word spread through the neighborhood about the soldier's frantic search during the storm. Neighbors who had once been mere acquaintances became friends, touched by the depth of his devotion. The soldier, in turn, realized that community could be a powerful force against loneliness. Although he tried to keep his life private after the media frenzy, he saw now that letting people in, at least on a local level, provided a safety net not just for himself, but for his dog as well. Days rolled into weeks and life found a gentler pace. The dog's fur grew healthier, his eyes brighter. The soldier's limp became less pronounced as physical therapy paid off. They spent mornings visiting a nearby lake where the dog would wade in the shallows, occasionally startling a frog or dragonfly. Evenings were for reflection, the soldier sometimes writing in a journal, capturing not just the pain but also the moments of joy, the playful wag of a tail, the sense of peace that settled in after a good day. Then, in a quiet twist that nobody saw coming, the soldier received a phone call. It was from another veteran, an old squad mate whom he believed had died overseas. Through some miraculous stroke of fate, the friend had survived and been repatriated. The soldier nearly dropped the phone in shock. Memories rushed back like a flood, laughter in the barracks, whispered jokes under the stars, and the dog weaving between them, seeking affection. As soon as the friend could speak more than a few sentences at a time, he told the soldier he wanted to come visit, to meet the dog again, if he was still alive. The soldier's heart clenched with a mix of elation and sadness. Yes, the dog was indeed alive, and yes, they would both be there waiting. The friend arrived on a late autumn day, stepping off a bus with a weathered backpack and eyes that had seen too much. The soldier greeted him with an awkward embrace, each man recognizing in the other the same scars, invisible but profound. They drove to the soldier's home, where the dog waited anxiously by the door. The moment the friend stepped inside, the dog let out an uncertain bark, as if trying to place a distant scent. The soldier's friend knelt down, calling the dog by a long-forgotten nickname. The dog's tail wagged hesitantly at first, then faster, until he trotted forward, nuzzling the friend's hands. They spent the evening reminiscing, sharing stories of harrowing missions and comedic misadventures. The dog lounged at their feet, occasionally looking up when he heard words he recognized, like the friend's name or certain references to the old unit. The soldier watched his friend scratch the dog's ears, and a wave of gratitude washed over him. Here, in this simple living room, two old comrades and a loyal dog were defying the odds stacked against them. They were proof that not all stories end in tragedy, that sometimes the battered can still find their way home. Over dinner, the friend revealed a surprising intention. He wanted to adopt a dog of his own. The soldier encouraged him, explaining how the companionship had been a lifeline, a reason to get out of bed on the hardest mornings. They looked up local shelters, though the friend hinted that he might adopt one of the dog's relatives, if such a thing existed. The soldier chuckled, explaining that while it was unlikely, you never knew what fate had in store. They agreed to visit the shelter together the next day, just to see if a special bond might spark between the friend and a dog needing a home. When they arrived at the shelter, the mood was lighter than the soldier's first time there. The staff recognized him immediately and were thrilled to see the dog visiting again, this time as a success story, healthy, happy, and brimming with a newfound confidence. The dog sniffed curiously at the kennels, wagging his tail at some of the residents. The soldier's friend moved carefully down the row, pausing to kneel before each kennel, speaking to the dogs in a soft, reassuring voice. After an hour of introductions, he found a small terrier mix with a wiry coat who seemed to cling to the cage bars, longing for a friend. There was an immediate connection in the way the dog nuzzled the friend's hand through the fence, tail wagging furiously despite obvious fear. Moved by the moment, the soldier's friend decided on the spot that this little terrier would be his new companion. Papers were filled out and the adoption was approved. They returned to the soldier's home, 2 dogs in tow. At first, the soldier's dog seemed a bit wary of the newcomer, a smaller ball of fur with soulful eyes. But after a few tentative sniffs, they accepted each other. By evening, they were curled up on opposite ends of the same rug, quietly dozing. In the following days, the friend stayed with the soldier while he prepared for his new life with the terrier. Both men found a sense of purpose in training and socializing the dogs, taking them on walks and practicing basic commands. The soldier's dog, once traumatized and unsure, now served as a gentle mentor, helping the terrier learn how to navigate this new environment. The friend watched in awe as the soldier's dog exhibited a calm confidence, guiding the smaller dog around the yard, even sharing toys. Through it all, the soldier felt a profound sense of unity. Their makeshift pack might have been unusual, 2 veterans fighting ghosts of a shared past and 2 dogs each bearing their own scars, but there was strength in their bond. On quiet afternoons, they would gather on the porch, the dogs sprawled at their feet, the breeze carrying the scent of pine. Sometimes words weren't necessary. The soldier and his friend would glance at each other, remembering the nights they thought they wouldn't survive, the buddies who never made it home. They'd look at the dogs, living proof that life could continue, that love could outlast despair. As the friend prepared to move into a nearby rental house, they decided to hold a small barbecue in the soldier's yard, a celebration of life, friendship, and second chances. Word spread among local veterans and neighbors who had come to love the soldier's dog after following their story. On the day of the gathering, the yard buzzed with conversation and laughter. Families with children petted the dogs who roamed freely, wagging their tails in excitement. Burgers sizzled on the grill, and the sweet smell of barbecue sauce filled the air. At one point, the soldier stood near the grill, scanning the scene before him. He saw his dog playing fetch with a group of kids. Nearby, the friend's terrier bounded around, chasing after a toy squeaking in someone's hand. Veterans swapped stories and neighbors cracked jokes. The soldier closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun and the chorus of happy voices seep into his being. For so long, he'd known war and loss. Now in this simple, joyful moment, he recognized something akin to healing. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the friend, wearing a wistful smile. "Hard to believe we're here," the friend said quietly, nodding toward the dogs. The soldier returned a smile, a lump forming in his throat. "Yeah," he managed. "Sometimes I can't believe it either." The 2 men stood there, side by side, as dogs barked and children laughed, each of them soaking in a peace that had once seemed unattainable. That night, after everyone had gone home, the soldier sat in the living room with the dog curled beside him. He stroked the dog's fur, recalling the very first day they had truly reunited, the dog's hesitant approach, the moment of recognition. He thought of all the roads he'd traveled to find his friend, all the twists and near misses, all the heartbreak and relief. He remembered the bullet that whistled past his ear in that distant war zone, the photograph he clung to in the darkness, and the unwavering hope that had guided him home. An overwhelming surge of emotion rose within him, a kaleidoscope of gratitude, sorrow, and triumph. He whispered a quiet thank you to the dog, who thumped his tail in response. Maybe it was silly to thank an animal, but in the soldier's heart, the dog had been the anchor that kept him from drifting too far into despair. No one could have predicted the ripple effects of their reunion. From a viral news story that touched countless lives to the quiet transformations in their immediate community, they had become a symbol of resilience. People who had lost faith found a reason to hope in their story. Others who had gone through trauma realized they weren't alone. For the soldier, it wasn't about fame or a Hollywood ending. It was about the truth that sometimes, when you lose everything, you can still find your way back to what matters most. In the dimly lit room, with the dog resting peacefully at his side, the soldier felt tears slip down his cheeks. He let them fall unchecked, each drop a testament to the battles won, both on and off the field. This was the kind of ending no one could have scripted, a testament to how life, fragile and brutal, can also be astonishingly generous. He rose from the couch and opened the window. A soft breeze ruffled his hair, carrying the faint scent of the orchard from afar. He thought back to that war-torn night when mortar fire streaked the sky, when the only bright spot had been a photograph of a dog. Now that dog was more than a photograph. He was here, real and warm, a part of each breath the soldier drew. As moonlight poured into the room, the dog stirred, blinking sleepy eyes before trotting over to nuzzle the soldier's hand. No words were needed. They both knew exactly what this moment signified. Leaning down, the soldier pressed his forehead gently against the dog's. "We made it," he murmured. The dog's ears perked up, tail wagging slowly in the hush. Outside, the world continued to spin. People lived, fought, loved, and lost. But here, in this little house, in this one fleeting moment, was the full force of a love that had overcome every obstacle hurled its way. And it was nothing short of miraculous.